Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Fast Currents, where we discuss, debate, and let fly with our usual hot takes on web culture, design, innovation, and our digital future. I'm Barry Fisk, CXO of Merkle in the Americas and moderator for Fast Currents. Today's topic, we're talking about the future. No, we're not going to talk about space robots and teleportation machines, at least not in this episode. But what we're talking about really is the future of B2B, future of business to business, right? If you think about it, we've been through a pandemic, wars, shifting geopolitics, the rise and fall of a lot of new technologies, huge shocks to the global supply chain. Today, 75% of B2B buyers are under the age of 35. There's more competition, longer deal cycles, greater attrition. If the recent past is any indication, it's clear B2B is going to be really different in just a few years. But how different? To help us predict the future of B2B, we brought today together a panel of B2B experts. Let's meet them. So first up, our digital leader, strategist, technologist, and global head of experience and commerce at Merkle. Please welcome Holden Bale.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Barry.
Next, let's welcome artist, experience strategist, and digital transformation expert, Rocco Albano.
Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here.
Good. And then finally, say hello to designer, futurist, deep thinker, and chief experience officer of Merkle in the UK, ironically joining us from Paris. Benoit, you'll have to explain that, but Benoit Chicret is with us.
Great to be here.
All right. And as always, manning our comments and producing our show, we've got our social media superstars, Nick Verlaney and Haley Science. Thank you for joining, everyone. Okay, let's kick things off with the speed round. So panelists, what is it about B2B that makes it so different from B2C? Benoit, why don't we start with you?
So I would say the most obvious one is probably longer sales cycle and more decision makers, because it's quite CX is already complex, but in B2B, it's even more so because of the amount of decision makers.
Yeah. Holden, what do you think? What makes it so different from B2C?
Oftentimes people say regulation and the complexity of product cycles. I don't know. I think that depends, because B2B isn't a vertical. It's a number of categories. And so SaaS is less heavily regulated than the chemicals industry. I agree with them, though. I think fundamentally it takes a village.
Yeah. There are a lot of people.
In most B2B decision processes versus you as an end consumer,
Yeah.
Maybe you might get into an argument with somebody about buying the wrong car or something, but for the most part, it's you making the decision.
Yeah. Rocco, what have we missed? What's the big difference that we haven't talked about yet?
So I'm clearly aligned to what Benoit and Holden said, but I think cost. Obviously, these are extremely expensive. It can be very expensive purchases. But I also think that it's shifting to B2C, meaning that average buyer really has experienced and been grown up in the Amazonification of e-commerce.
Yeah.
So that's simplifying the process. And that's one of the things that's going to drive growth.
Yeah. So, we're here to talk about B2B, certainly, but mainly we're here to talk about the future. Holden, why don't we start with you? Why is B2B such an interesting and great window for predicting the future?
Because I think B2B creates the future. I think when you talk about systems scale and systems change, and if it's going to, everything from our brand's going to adopt blockchain to what happens with sustainability in our environment, B2B moves the world economy. And so when you're looking at B2B categories, I think you're looking at the future of our lived experience as humans. Not to make it sound too grandiose, but that's what it is.
Yeah. All right. The future of our experience as humans, Rocco. Why is B2B such a good way to predict the future?
I think as the entire physical world becomes digitized and runs on AI, it will be B2B that's leading that massively scaled digital infrastructure. And to bring it to a B2B/B2C example, in the future, B2B innovation is going to enable your car to tell you, hey, your tires need to be replaced within 2 weeks. Here's your options. Here's where they can be replaced. Okay, I've set the appointment. You've picked the product. You take the car in, and then you're going to be able to QA those tires being replaced. And you're going to be able to do that all from your dashboard of your phone.
Yeah. Benoit, what do you think? Like, what is it about B2B that it's such an interesting way to look at the future?
So just to build on what Holden and Rocco was saying, I agree. When you think of B2B, it does powers the world economy, and we often in our industry, or generally speaking, talk about customers becoming more savvier and demanding more. I think it's very much the same for B2B buyers. And if you look at the future of B2B, like what we call commercial transactions, are not enough already, right? So what consumers want are those sort of personalized relationship at scales and omni-channel involvement throughout the entire purchasing process.
Yeah.
And so I think if you take all these factors and what Holden and Rocco said, I think all these are becoming a key element of competitive differentiation. And I think B2B is very much sort of at the forefront of this urgent need for change, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's shift into, I think, our kind of core discussion. And just a shout out to all of you. Thank you again for joining us for another episode here of Fast Currents. If you have a question and you want to throw it in at our expert panel, go ahead and you can write in the form field, I believe, right in your viewing panel. You can type in a question. We'll try to get to some of them throughout the discussion today. If we can't, then we'll definitely follow up and make sure that you get an answer afterwards in the comments. But Holden, let's just start with you. Like, what really prompted you to sort of pull this team together to kind of think about putting these predictions together about the future of B2B?
Because I was annoyed. B2B is fundamentally underserved. First, functionally, nobody talks about B2B categories in digital experience. Like, Warby Parker did this, Amazon did that. Look at this face thing in your phone and whatever. And even though B2B experience transformation can change industries, right? The second thing is a lot of the research tends to be super academic, beyond the fluffy, like thought leadership. Here's 5 ways to market better or whatever. In terms of focus area, it tends to either be about operational excellence or closer to our world, which might be considered marketing and sales. But we wanted to go deeper than that because we've done so much scale digital transformation work for clients, because of appreciation for the complexity that B2B has that B2C doesn't. We wanted to do something that was more holistic. So systems change. And we wanted to do something that was about the future in the broad digital economy. We couldn't find it. So we said, well, we do this work all the time. We have an international research division that's focused on B2B. Let's create the research we wish was out there.
Right. So Benoit, I mean, so describe the process a little bit. Like, how many predictions are there in this B2B futures report and that kind of stuff? Like, what was the process like of gathering and building these predictions?
So it was an extensive process. There's 4 predictions, and one around sustainability, one around machine to machine, one around marketplaces, and the last one that Rocco will probably, I imagine, cover in detail because we worked on it together. But we looked at, we talked to industry leaders, we talked to analysts, business analysts. We like Holden was saying, we work with researchers. Yeah. Over the course of sort of 6 months, we collaborated globally because, like you said, I'm based in Europe. Some of our researchers are based in APAC, and Rocco and Holden are based in the US. And so it was an extensive research process. And then we sort of narrowed down the enormous amount of content that we created. I think originally we had much more than 4 predictions. We ended up sort of narrowing down to 4. Yeah. And so that's how we got to those. That's how I would say we can confidently say that we have 4 solid predictions for sort of like the rest of the decade.
So let's get into them then. Rocco, why don't we start with you? Nice tee up there by Benoit. So we're talking about the year 2030, and you're making a prediction about the scale of B2B commerce, tripling from 8 trillion to 25 trillion. Like, talk about that. Like, what is powering that growth, and why did you predict that incredible sort of increase?
Sure. So, we went back and forth a lot on this one. And as Holden said, there's a ton of research out there. We were able to use some of our own research as well as we narrowed in on 3 other research papers that were all within that range of 24 to 26 trillion. And then we looked at the other predictions, right? So this wasn't made in a vacuum. But, I'd say that one of the reasons we're going to see that astounding growth is, look, the commoditization of transistors and sensors, everything, everywhere connectivity, that's already happening, and it's only going to continue to happen. AI, blockchain, quantum computing, right? So we're going to have light running through integrated circuits instead of electricity. We're talking about essentially at the end of the day, B2B is going to be able to compress time to shape and meet its needs, which means we're going to be able to bring products to market far faster than ever before and determine what products are going to fail so we don't waste time and move on to next.
Yeah.
So it's basically taking a laser to where investments are made and making sure we have a much better probability of them paying off.
Yeah. As going to call out, like, nobody knew. Nobody knows that B2B e-commerce is $8 trillion. It's really hard to find that data. We had to create it in some cases. We had to infer it. You can kind of abstract B2C commerce. Like, this is maybe only I care about this. It was very hard to try and estimate what the total state of B2B e-commerce is. And when you see the growth curves, they astound you. They astound you because penetration in B2C e-commerce is basically flat every year. It'll just grow the way that category grows. But B2B e-commerce is a huge opportunity for digital penetration of sales. And so when you actually put these numbers in front of people, they tend to just be like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Very high. Are you sure? We're sure.
Well, then I would add one thing to that Benoit's going to talk about. A lot of the B2B commerce is invisible. It is machine to machine, and Benoit's going to go into that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, I think, Benoit, let's get into that. So one of the other predictions was just around this notion of machine to machine commerce. Why don't you explain what you mean by that, why it's so important to B2B, and how is this kind of transformational?
So when we talk about machine to machine commerce, what we don't mean is Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator buying WD-40 on his mobile phone.
Yeah.
What we mean is that, so our prediction is that by 2030, we anticipate that a third of B2B digital commerce, which, as Holden was saying, $8 trillion, will be made through machine-to-machine interaction, right, with no human involvement. So that means that if you are a B2B organization, your 2030 customer will be likely a machine with wallet, right? And, it sounds a bit exaggerated, but the reason why we're saying that is that we know that machines are already playing a large role in the life cycle of global commerce in general. And there's in those transactions, there's no approval, there's no human approval at key points, right? But tomorrow, there's human approval at key points, but tomorrow we know that machine will be able to sort of transact on behalf of buyers and brands, and this will have a massive impact on how we also design, right, for commerce.
Yeah.
I think that's the key point.
Yeah. So Holden, give us some examples of like where machine to machine is happening today and where you think you're going to see more.
Many thousands of years ago, which you can tell because I am so fashionable. I was being trained to be a buyer in retail for sweaters. And when you do merchandise planning for sweaters, you manage a budget. Like I'm the sweater buyer for Zara. I have a $250 million budget for sweaters for the fall. You don't use all of your budget at the start of the fall. You only use a little bit of your budget to fill in the stores because you want to see the trends and then you want to like optimize and you want to buy into, oh, that sweater's doing well, that color's doing well in this area. In the world of merchandise planning, that stuff is starting to get heavily automated. So you might say up to like $1 million, I'll just let a machine do a buy for me. And when you actually go backwards and you look at a decision where a human got involved versus the machine did it itself because the human had a special touch and wanted to make sure that like they knew something about some signal the machine could see. The human outcome is worse. The human outcome performed worse. You see it in manufacturing facilities. You're running low on pallets. You have an inventory software automatically reorder. So a lot of B2B commerce today is actually very like low complexity sort of commodity. A lot of that's being automated. And so this prediction can seem scary until you start thinking about scenarios like that. It will start to take over because it just makes sense, slightly more complex, higher stakes tasks. But this is already a real thing. We just see it as increasing growth of something that's here.
Yeah. I think of it as just automating just-in-time manufacturing, basically.
That is sort of
like, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna add this. I think a lot of those behaviors within B2B are driven by what's being done in B2C, right? And that inherently is creating a new B2B landscape, because we have, we not only have automations moving into B2B, so a lot of it driven by the ever presence of IoT within our world, which makes everything a lot more observable and quantifiable. But also, there's a new generation of professional within the B2B world that are digital native, who are used to actually buy online and are quite comfortable spending big bucks on self-serving online without any sort of interaction. Right, that's very much becoming the new normal for them, and they're now becoming super comfortable with automated commerce in their day-to-day.
Yeah. So we've actually got a question that's come in from the audience that let me just read it here, because I think it's super timely. It says, Barry, yes or no, while we talk about digital transformation for companies, when are firms going to accept they need organizational transformation first? The org structure and internal culture always holds up the digital transformation efforts and slow down timelines. So if you think about the scale that's happening in B2B that we're predicting, and you think about the shift to machine commerce, that's really interesting. Like Rocco, why don't you talk about that? Like what are you seeing around either the willingness or the barriers that some B2B organizations have around adjusting their organization to be able to embrace these trends that you're predicting?
Sure. So I think some companies, let's just use the chemical industry as an example. For some companies, it's going to be too late. They're just going to be devoured because of B2B marketplaces that have specialized on the chemical industry and can outcompete any distributor that doesn't provide extensive added value. I think one sector or industry that is maturing rapidly because their processes are already so regulated, complex, and they have to plan for these long cycles is the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is looking at every aspect of innovation, of B2B transformation. Remember, most of the drugs they create isn't us just going and buying them. They have to then bring these to market through physicians, through hospitals, through health systems. And I really think that those organizations are restructuring, and they're looking and going, it's not just marketing and sales anymore. It's what is the transformative power that we can bring to our end customer, which is the patient, but that we have to go through the physician to get to. So
yeah.
A great example.
I have to jump in. I believe, respectfully to the question, that organizational transformation versus digital transformation is an operative fallacy in that question, respectfully, again, which is thinking of them as different. If you conceive of digital transformation as being about a bunch of technology stuff, I think it's reductive. I think you've missed the point of digital. In the same way, you can miss the point of experience transformation if you think, well, I just need a pretty website. Yeah, but I mean, the three different silos still don't talk to each other, and I still can't buy the way I want as a consumer, and your incentive models still don't line up. So that line is... Digital transformation is a vessel for looking at what is happening in the landscape of technology and digitalization of processes and saying, what does that mean for the transformation of my business? And if you're not thinking about op model and process and org design and incentives and technology and experience, then I don't think you're thinking about digital transformation the right way.
I agree with that. What I'm reading in from the question, though, is that the person who's asking it sort of feels like a lot of the folks that they're working with don't recognize that needs to be a part of it as well. So like the operative, for those of us in the professional services business, or for those of us trying to help people with, I don't know, machine-to-machine commerce, or I think we're going to go to a question on marketplaces next, like how do we, Holden, help convince clients that the org redesign or the org transformation piece has to be a part of it?
Every time, and this is a trick that I think anybody can use. I think you can use it if you're at a brand right now. You could use it yourself. Is all of your value cases and your ROI needs to bake in adoption. It's like change management 101. And adoption frozen some sort of structural change around operating model incentives. So think about like value stream. You sell through distributors and you want to start selling direct to end consumer, business consumer. could be a whole new way of working for you. I can implement all the tech, I can implement the great experience. You're never going to have the ROI. So when you start factoring op change into ROI calculations, you treat it as a first-class citizen from day one. But it's hard. That's the hard thing about hard things. It is harder. Even though ERP implementations suck and are terrible and always take 72 years and cost $10 trillion, and the second you're done with one, you have to go to the next one because it took so long. It is still easier to do an ERP implementation than an org transformation.
Yeah.
So the reality is you have to eat the frog. You have to lean into the hard thing.
Yeah. People are the hardest technology to control, baby. Yeah.
Well, I think that isn't a real quick, just to close on it. I think that's one of the things that's going to be a major hurdle to transformation of an organization. Many people are worried about, where's my job going to go? Is it going to be eliminated because of AI? Is my company going to put complete profitability over my needs as well? And I think that has to be brought into the mix culturally, right? Analog, digital, physical.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you alluded to it, Mark Rocco. Why don't you take this next one here that I think was we just got a peek at, basically. Like you've made reference to it. I think a lot of the stuff is kind of implied. But I mean, marketplaces that I think a lot of people think of as B2C kind of things are a huge part of your predictions for the future of B2B. Why is that, Rocco?
I think it varies based on the company size, but marketplaces focus on whether it's a mega marketplace like Alibaba and Amazon that you can buy everything from chemicals to office supplies on, or it's a niche marketplace like Node, which is focused on chemicals. Marketplaces do a lot of the heavy lifting for brands that are in the B2B space. They go and acquire the qualified customers. They nurture those audiences. And for smaller businesses that, let's say, are generating under $100 million a year in revenue, they build out highly complex, very effective platforms that allow for commerce to be transacted on a global scale, right? So it lets businesses then focus on, hey, these are the products I sell, this is what I make, and this is what I can deliver to my potential customers, and I need to acquire more customers.
Yeah.
Focus on what I do best and not go off and try and build out my own e-commerce stack when I'm doing $42 million in revenue.
Yeah.
So it's an efficiency play. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's really an efficiency play. I mean, the one thing I'll end with is even AB InBev has jumped into the market. In 2022, they stood up a marketplace, right, that's geared towards microbrewers, and they did $220 million. By 2023, they did $350 million plus in revenue. Think about that scale that quick.
Yeah. And when you think about the complex things that can be sold on marketplaces, I mean, that takes us kind of to our next question and the next prediction, right? This one, Benoit, you can take this one here. One of the other big predictions you talk about here is that B2B buying decisions you're predicting are not just going to be driven by price and availability. They're going to be driven by this notion of traceability, and traceability not just on how the products that you personally make and manufacture were built and all that kind of the impact of them, but theoretically the traceability of products that other people made that you had nothing to do with, that you just happen to sell through your marketplace. Like, talk about the rise of traceability and how this is going to happen in your mind, Benoit.
Yeah, I think that's another major driver of this sort of new B2B landscape that we're going to see, or we're starting to see. If you look at global brands or brands in general, but global brands specifically, there's a real complexity, legal complexity, right? And a real danger to their reputation if they're not careful about who they're working with and their suppliers and how they produce their product. But there's also a real risk for brands that cannot align their product sourcing and their business practices to their B2B customers' value, right? And historically, if you look at the global supply chain and manufacturing in the world of goods, it has, I would say, it has been a real challenge for brands to have a real transparency when it comes to traceability. But it is changing, and that's part of the prediction, right? Like we talk about how the likes of blockchain or new technologies, but to name one, blockchain, are sort of helping making traceability more possible today, and almost decreasing the cost of technology is also helping eliminate some of those barriers around data.
Yeah.
There's also regulation that we're seeing that, that are mandating greater control of supply, right? And I think ultimately, and for me, most importantly, there's a real shift in not just business sentiment, but also social sentiment from B2B buyers that has almost like forced brands to recodify their values, and align them to everyone that they're working with, and making sure that their suppliers, etc., are also aligned to their customers' values. So there's almost like an expectation of providing a proof to enforce sort of that.
Then, well, I remember when you first put that prediction in front of us, and you said Walmart was using blockchain, and they could trace down to a crate of mangoes what store it was in 2.2 seconds. And I thought, well, that's great, but what are you going to need it for? And then I forwarded you the article a few weeks later. Unfortunately, 8 people in the U.S. have just died from salmonella from eating tainted mangoes. Now, the grocery market wasn't named, but when you think about the impact that type of technology could have on saving lives as one example, that's incredible.
Yeah. Rocco, you just lost us the mango business, buddy. I don't, that just irrecoverable.
Well, it was cantaloupe. Stop. Anyway.
Yeah. But Holden, talk about this, because I do think this makes sense logically. And I think about people in the B2C landscape wanting to make choices around clothing or things that are representative of them, around being, I like the way this was manufactured. I like the way the workers were paid. I feel like this was reliably sourced. But B2B has this reputation of being cold. And are you really saying that someone is going to pay more for traceability? Like price is going to be the top driver?
We're saying that this is much more important in B2B than it is in B2C. Because in B2C, you have the behavior intention gap, and you have cognitive psychology, and you have sort of banner blindness. Like, you can tell me it's made sustainably, but I don't really know. There's not guidance. There's not a rubric. Everybody says it's like organic, this, that, the other, free range, locally sourced t-shirts. I don't know. What does that mean? In B2B, governments will mandate, and your board will mandate that you have improved traceability. This is not just a sustainability story. This is a big shipping container in the middle of COVID got stuck in the middle of a canal, and we watched a tiny little digger thing try to get it out for a while, and it broke the global supply chain. It was an allegory for that. And when that happened, all of a sudden, every single person at the board level of every company started caring a lot about deep traceability on their direct and indirect supply chain. And it just so happens that if you implement those traceability controls, it allows you to also answer for sustainability. When you think about some of the laws that are coming through the EU and the country of California in terms of sustainability concerns. So it's not just that it's the reason you're going to pay more is because it's not just a qualitative factor, it's a quantitative factor because you have to, because it's a question of solvency, or it's a question of reporting, or it's a question of government regulations.
Yeah. So let's go to the last prediction here, which, and Rocco, you can take this one. This is really about speed. So, we talked about marketplaces, we talked about traceability, we talked about machine to machine. One of the things it sounds like you really think is driving this massive growth to $25 trillion of B2B by 2030 is speed to market. Like how fast are things going to get, and what is this really going to unlock?
Yeah, I had 2 examples until yesterday, and I'm going to go with one example. It's not in the report, but there are great examples in the reports as well. And I'm going to tie it to what Holden just said. So we know that the United States government has just reduced substantially or eliminated electronic vehicle rebates at the dealership if the lithium is being supplied in the battery primarily by China. We also know that 2 to 3 weeks ago, underneath the California Salton Sea, billions of tons of lithium was discovered. They projected that it could actually create 356 million EV lithium batteries. Okay, that's going to take a while to get that all out. Yesterday, a release came out that Microsoft, working with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which is part of the U.S. Department of Energy, so this is government here, they have potentially discovered a new material that will reduce lithium use by 70%. So when you start to think about that, one, we bring the supply chain of lithium back to the United States for EVs that are produced here. We get the rebate back in place. 2, you take that 18 billion tons and now you quadruple that by a factor of 7 is incredible. But what's even more incredible is that Microsoft researchers used AI and supercomputers, so let's assume quantum computing, to narrow down 32 million inorganic chemicals to 18 candidates in less than a week. That typically took 2 decades. That is a 100,000% acceleration of speed to market. It is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Now, they've used it to light a light bulb. We're getting there, but think about how fast they did that.
There's an old Mark Twain quote. I don't know who he was talking about. He was talking about like a friend of his or something. He said, "Between the two of us, we're perfect. He knows everything, and I know the rest." And sometimes that's how I feel about me and Rocco. He knows everything, and I know the rest. You know?
No, I just would like to point out that, but something does not quadruple by a factor of 7. I don't know what it is, but it's but that's all right. I'm with you, baby. So let's go to like the so what question here, really, which is no, not this one. I think but just like, what is it that all B2B companies need to be doing now, right? You're talking about year 2030. It's 2024. Last time I checked, we've got a little bit of time. The world is changing so rapidly. You might even be suspect that, like, are we even accurate about something 6 years out? Like, Holden, start with you. Like, what are some things based on these predictions that you really are coaching clients to be doing now?
It is so easy to get caught up in the hype cycle. And so we start the whole report in some of the presentations we've done. We talk about, like, we were talking about Web3 5 minutes ago, and now all we're talking about is AI. As simplistic as it seems, brilliant basics and core foundations. The first second I start talking to a brand, it doesn't matter what their core business is, I say, tell me what your experience or channel strategy is, either one, because based on that, I can infer your business strategy. And then tell me what your technology strategy is or capability strategy. And then, okay, pause. Now draw a line between the two.
Yeah.
If either one doesn't exist, it has to be created. Because if you do any of this work, if you're chasing after a bunch of phantoms and ghosts, and you're dealing with rising capital pressure, whatever else, it spirals out of control. You never realize any sort of enterprise benefit. If the linkage between the two doesn't exist, that work must be done. Because if you can't say, okay, this is my business strategy, therefore this is my capability strategy, this is what's core, where I'm going to invest, this is where I'm going to outsource, leverage, optimize, you're going to be working on the wrong things, or you end up an example of that old joke, right? That vision without execution is hallucination. So really, without the sort of foundational guiding principles of what's core to your experience and channel strategy, and then how do you activate that competitive advantage, the risk is, you're just like, oh, I did generative AI for this random thing off in a corner, and it didn't tie back to any sort of core strategy. It doesn't accrete any benefit. So I'm a big believer in going back to foundations, even though the pace of change feels very fast.
I mean, Benoit, you're doing a lot of work thinking about innovation and helping clients think about that, but applied innovation, I think it's sort of similar. How are you coaching B2B companies on how to sort of prepare or think about or start to sort of adopt some of these, new technologies that are really the foundation, I think, of these predictions?
Yeah. So I think for me, from an experience, I think it's more the trying to get them to ask themselves and the organization the right questions. And so looking at it from my lens, which is the experience lens, it's sort of, asking them if, making sure that they have a clear experience strategy, not just for their B2B customers, but also for their employees and their partners, suppliers. It's also making sure that the focus is of the personalization, because personalization is another buzzword that we've heard for many years, but making sure, what are the focuses of your personalization? How do you help discovery? How do you help evaluation? How do you support purchase life cycle, for example? How do you increase conversion? And then we talked about, we touch on things like operating model earlier, right? So like, do you track agility as a board level KPI, or more than agility, adaptiveness, right? How adaptive is your organization? And do you have adaptiveness as a KPI? And do you factor those improvement in how adaptive your organization is as part of the various investment cases that you may be making into your capabilities, right? There's a lot more, there's things around, we talk about culture also. You talked about innovation. So, there's your company culture believes in innovation or intentional innovation, and things like that, right? It's quite, you have to talk about, you have to look at it from an experience point of view, from an operating model point of view, but also from a capability perspective, right?
Yeah. So Rocco, why don't you take us home? Like, I mean, machine to machine commerce, the speed of things, like how are you coaching some B2B companies on how to sort of like participate in this changing future right now?
Right. So I think Holden and Benoit covered a lot of the deep details. I think that, right now we're working, for instance, with one client, like let's start to experiment. Let's bring experimentation into what you do in your B2B business. And this is a B2B business where they may think, well, we don't need all that innovation for what we do, but they absolutely do. And I think that a lot of businesses, partly knocked out by COVID, but a lot of businesses have stopped investing in experimentation. And I think that's where some of the greatest fruits are going to come from, especially around machine-to-machine commerce or a new era of speed. And then the last thing I'd say is follow Jeff Bezos. I mean, I'm following who he's investing in now.
Yeah.
And he's investing in AI companies heavily. And, take the same page from his book. He noticed there were this many internet users back in 1993 and thought, I'm going to sell books online. And you know what? That gamble paid off. So follow the leaders.
Yeah, I love it. Follow the leaders. Well, let's wrap this conversation here and sort of take us into our next bit here. So excellent stuff, everybody. Thank you. Let's welcome in Haley Saenz coming in here from the world of web culture. So let's move on to our web culture speed round. How's the conversation so far, Haley? How are we doing?
It's wonderful. I'm learning so much.
Okay, good. All right. So, that's right. We like to always try to take these somewhat academic and long-winded conversations and try to sort of figure out if there's some things that are happening in the moment, in the now here in web culture. And so, Haley, you put together, I believe, 3 sort of like web culture questions for this illustrious panel. What's your first question?
I sure did. All right. So we are officially in award season. We got our first taste this weekend with the Golden Globes. So I am wondering which of the nominated shows and or movies you would recommend.
Yeah. All right. Holden, why don't you kick it off with us? Like, what's the recommendation to the world?
Abbott Elementary is the best network comedy in years. It deserves all the wins. I heard about Slow Horses only recently on Apple TV and then finished all 3 seasons in 5 seconds. So they didn't win, but it's a good binge. And then The Bear. I mean, The Bear is kind of obvious.
Yeah. Rocco, how about you, buddy? What's your recommendation to the world?
It was not an easy movie to watch, but Oppenheimer. If you have the stomach for existentialism and meeting Occam's razor and you like Francis Bacon paintings, I mean, I took my teenagers to it. Don't do that; they both fell asleep. But it was a mind-opening movie.
Awesome. Okay, Benoit, what have you got?
No, I'm not going to be very original. I was going to say Succession. It's probably my all-time favorite show, from this year.
All right. Well, you're all wrong. The clear answer is the 2023 MTV Movie and TV Award nominee for Best Villain, Cocaine Bear, which I watched recently. I had heard it was, I have never seen my wife laugh so hard in her life. It was fabulous. I ignore the critics. Everybody watch Cocaine Bear. Excellent work by Elizabeth Banks.
Based on a true story.
Based on a true story. Final film of Ray Liotta, R.I.P., and some great work there by a whole bunch of character actors. They got everyone to participate in it. All right, Haley, what's our second web culture question?
We had the Pop-Tarts Bowl and the Duke's Mayo Bowl both go pretty viral on social media. And then we finally had the college football championships on Monday with Michigan taking home the crown. So if you could make up a bowl game, who would you have sponsor it?
Yeah. All right, Rocco, why don't we start with you? What's the dream sponsor bowl?
I don't like their burgers, but I love their name, the Smash Burger Bowl. I think it fits with football.
There you go. All right, Holden, you go next.
I saw a thing where there's a bunch of like they still do mascot games versus kids where people are dressed up as mascots and they just like beat the hell out of these kids. And it's very funny. It's like a terrible thing that we do as a society, but it's super amusing. And so I was like, I don't know, some sort of like mascot international trade federation, but I would love to see like all of the elite sport team mascots, just like there's a giant bird and there's a giant coyote playing against a college football team. I think I would watch that. I would tune in.
Fantastic. I like it. All right, Benoit, from your deep college football experience there from Paris. So what are your thoughts on the bowl game names?
I was thinking blood lubricants, because blood lubricants bowl, making your blood boil.
Yeah. All right. I like
it. I'll show myself out.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I went into a couple of our clients and I tried to imagine them. I came up with the Birkenstocks vegan leather bowl, Super Cuts bowl cut bowl, Burt's Bees wax bowl, the Maggiano's all you can eat pasta bowl, the M&M's no green ones bowl with Van Halen reference. The problem is when we're living in a world where there's an actual bowl called the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl, that is a real bowl. And the big ones just can't even live up. So that's where we're at.
All right. Final question. It's our first Fast Currents of 2024. And I asked this on the last one of 2023, but I want to hear from you guys too. Make a pop culture prediction for this year. Something you think is going to happen.
Yeah. All right, Benoit, what's your prediction for 2024?
I want to say, because Nick is also moderating, we can't see him here. Nick is moderating this show from Kansas City. I want to say Travis Kelce on the cover of Vogue magazine.
Okay. I like that. That's good. All right, Rocco, what's your prediction for 2024?
I'm going to tie right into that one, that the NFL, working with the Kansas City Chiefs, is going to create the Swiftie jersey. It's going to sell 10 million units, and Taylor Swift is graciously going to donate 80% of that money to support a charity to fight hunger, which she's done quite a bit of.
All right, there you go. All right, Holden, what's your pop culture reference?
Like my personal one is my Spotify Artist of the Year next year will also be Taylor Swift. So the world revolves around Taylor Swift. I think I would like the Zuckerberg Elon Musk cage fight to happen finally, because it's the only time in my life I've ever rooted for Mark Zuckerberg. You know, so I would just like that to happen. I think it would be the only time I would ever do sports betting. I don't sports bet. I would put money down on that. I'm really that's a personal hope more than a prediction, but
yeah. Well, a man can dream, Holden. There you go. Well, I don't know what's going on. Apparently, we all have football in the brain. So I'm just going to put it out in the universe and hope this manifests. I predict that the Buffalo Bills will win the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, and I, along with all of Bills Mafia, can finally die in happiness and joy. So that is my prediction for 2024. All right.
Sorry, it's the Ravens, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So great points, everybody. So the way we end all of our shows here is we like to sort of declare a winner. So Haley, in your opinion, who had the best sort of idea or comment or note here in today's show? Who's our winner?
Well, Holden did show his cat on camera before we started, so I kind of went into this a little biased. So I'm going to name Holden as my winner for this episode.
All right. Congratulations, Holden. There you go. Congratulations. I think Holden's cat was the winner, but I got you. Yeah. All right. And well, thank you to all of you for watching another great episode of Fast Currents. We really appreciate you joining us. And thanks again to all of our panelists. Help us, if you're out there, spread the word about Fast Currents by liking today's show, by sharing a link to today's episode, and by registering to get some notifications on future upcoming episodes of Fast Currents. We're going to keep doing these at sort of like a one every 6 or 8 week kind of clip. So we're really excited about a bunch of programming. We're also going to be diving, we think, into a bunch of short form content, which we'd love to have your participation and help sharing. If you're interested in working with some cool people at a very cool company, you can join us here by coming to Merkle.com/careers. If you want to get in touch about business, of course, drop us a note at marketing@Merkle.com. And if you are interested in downloading our full and complete report, there's a link that I think we're going to put in the comments. Haley may have already placed it in there for the B2B Futures Report. Definitely check it out. A lot of detail on all of these reports. And other than that, thank you again to Holden, Rocco, Benoit. I'm Barry, and for Haley and Nick. We'll see you all again on the next episode of Fast Currents. Bye.